Welcome to Kirrawee Library, our beautiful new library in our wonderful theatre. So I hope you enjoy the space. My name is Marissa and I'm a librarian here at Sutherland Shire Libraries, and I'm very pleased to have this in conversation with Tim Knight, who will be talking about his debut book, Gallipoli Soup. I'd like to start first of all with an acknowledgement to country. So Sutherland Shire Council acknowledges the Darrell people as the traditional custodians of the land within the Sutherland Shire. We pay respects to the elders and their families, past, present and emerging, and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's do some general housekeeping. In the event of an emergency, just follow staff directions, which is me and Jarrett over there. Toilets are located opposite the theatre here, or as you go out to the right. And please turn off your mobiles or put them onto silent. That would be great, thank you. And most importantly, if you would like to purchase a copy of Tim's book, please see Tim at the end of the night and he will also sign it for you. They are $30 and he is accepting cash, pay ID or card. If you have any questions, please put your hand up and I'll come to you with the microphone. There are people at home watching this, so for them to hear it, we need the microphone. So let's get on to the crux of this talk. I'd like to introduce our special guest, Tim Knight, who is an engineer who grew up in Sydney. His great-grandfather fought with the Australian Imperial Force of World War I, while his wife's grandfather fought with the Turkish forces against the Anzacs. And as I mentioned, this is his debut novel. So can you please give Tim a very warm welcome? So, your book is the story about Gallipoli.
Yep.
But how there's a lot of books out there about Gallipoli, but how is your book different to all those other ones out there that give an account of this major event in Australian military history?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of good books already written about Gallipoli. The campaign during World War One was over 100 years ago, and it's a very significant part of Australia's history. So a lot's been written about it. That's true, and a lot of good books. I've got multiple bookshelves full of them at home, having done a lot of research as well. A number of years back, I for reasons that I'll go into later, I'm sure, I developed quite a personal interest in the Gallipoli campaign, and decided I wanted to research it, understand more about it, and I didn't really have a lot of history of reading history books. I'm not the sort of person who really reads history books for the fun of it. But I really enjoy reading novels, and as I was reading the history books, I found a lot of the information I was seeking. I found the content was there. I was able to learn about the events that went on, but I found a lot of those books sort of fairly dry and a bit boring to read, to be honest, unless you're really seeking, like I was, seeking some specific facts. I found them a bit hard going. At the same time, I was reading the Game of Thrones novels, which is quite a different thing, I guess.
But the same size as your book.
Yeah, they're pretty solid as well. That's right, they're long books. A fantasy genre, but in a lot of ways like history. It's history of a pretend world, and there's some dragons involved, but it's essentially human conflict, different groups of people, politics and loyalties, and a story that's really fun to read, I guess, and very engaging. And I kind of had this thought in my mind that the story of Gallipoli should be told in that sort of way, that tells the story from all the different perspectives, not just a one-sided perspective, but also in a way that reads like a novel, that's sort of engaging, that you can get inside the characters' heads, understand their motivations and their emotional reactions and the conflicts that they had to deal with internally, as well as just the facts of what went on. So I had this idea that this book should sort of exist, and it seemed so clear in my mind that I went looking for it, thinking that someone must obviously have written it. But I couldn't really find anything that was sort of remotely close to what I was looking for. So in I guess a moment of sort of pure insanity, I thought, well, maybe I could write it without having any idea of what that what that really meant. But
Well,
that's a difference, I
yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Well, I think you've managed to do that with this book, and I do congratulate you on
Thank you.
that, because you have managed to marry the fiction with the fact very, very well. You have mentioned previously that in your website and podcasts I've watched of you, that in some ways you're not qualified to write about history, but in a way you are uniquely qualified to write it. Can you explain this to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. I have a family connection, as I think you mentioned in the introduction. So yeah, I grew up in the Sutherland Shire. I went to high school in the local area. We learned about history, and I remember learning about Gallipoli, World War One. We watched the movie Gallipoli, which was kind of new back then, back in the 1980s, and I remember learning how the Anzacs were heroes, brave heroes, and they were sort of cut down mercilessly by the Turks with the machine guns. In my class, I remember in year 10, one young lady stood up against the sort of popular anger against the Turkish forces and expressed an opposing view. So, the Australians shouldn't have even been there. They were invading another country. The Turkish soldiers were just defending their homeland, as they had every right to do. And that was sort of a conflicting view that I kind of couldn't really reconcile in my mind at the time. So yeah, if we fast forward from the 1980s to now, that young lady is now my wife and the mother of our 5 children, all of who are here tonight, and greatly appreciate all your support. So that's, I guess, our children have got the heritage and the bloodline of both sides of the conflict. My wife's grandfather, as you mentioned, fought for the Turkish forces against the Anzacs at Gallipoli. I had a great uncle who fought for the Anzacs at Gallipoli, and my great grandfather fought for the Australian Imperial Force. He didn't get to Gallipoli, he got as far as Egypt, and then went straight on to France because the Gallipoli campaign had wrapped up by that stage. So yeah, I guess our children have got both sides of that heritage, and that sort of really drove me to want to understand the conflict from all perspectives, not just this sort of one-sided view that we got in high school. And I guess that drove me to research the Turkish side as well as the Australian side.
Now, you've already alluded to this in one of your previous answers, but what inspires you to write this book, and how long did it take you to research it?
The time to take it, that's probably the easier one to answer. So the time taken to write it. From the time where I had that sort of crazy idea that maybe I could write the book, through to the point when I had a complete draft that I could give to someone else to review. It was about 7 years.
Wow.
So it's quite a long time. It was
a
hobby.
Labour of love.
Yeah, it was, but it was a hobby as well, I guess. Like, I really enjoyed it, and I couldn't have stuck at something for that long if I didn't enjoy it. So I, family, mortgage, full-time job, all of the things that occupy most people's time, I guess, at my sort of stage of life. So it was a hobby, but yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I chipped away at it and worked at it in my spare time over about that time.
Yeah.
The other part of your question about inspiration, I guess I've covered probably a lot of that. There's the family connection, and Also travelling to Turkey, I guess, and visiting Gallipoli made it feel a lot more real. Um, I've been to Gallipoli 3 times. The first time I was 24 years old, just finished my university degree in engineering, just got married, had my whole life ahead of me, and was very, very excited about the next phase of my life, I guess. And my wife and we travelled through Turkey to do a bit of backpacking to see a number of things. Stopped in at Gallipoli just for a one-day battlefield tour. It wasn't really a big part of the trip. But I remember thinking at the time, after having been in the country for a couple of weeks and really feeling quite culture shocked, but feeling like a foreigner in a strange land where I couldn't understand the language. I wasn't really an experienced traveller at that stage. But I remember going to Gallipoli and feeling quite surprised at how emotionally affected I was by it. Seeing the graves of young Australian men who are younger than even I was at that stage, 19, 20, 21 years old, after having been sort of immersed in this foreign culture, all these Australian names from Australian towns that I could recognise. And I found that quite, I actually felt quite angry, like how could this have happened? These young guys have come to the most remote part of the world that I could sort of imagine.
Yeah.
They were lined up in all these graves on the ground. It was sort of quite, it just seemed like the more significant thing to me when I saw that than I kind of ever had really thought about it.
Yeah, it's
before.
funny you say that because I went to Belgium a few years ago and family took us to some Australian soldiers' graves. And I don't usually get emotional with that kind of thing. But like you, I saw the graves and I saw the ages of the young men, and I actually started crying and got quite upset about it. And it actually shocked me. But to actually be there and experience that, it really does change your perspective on things.
Yeah, I should probably finish the answer to that question with the next trip to Gallipoli, which was a number of years later, and that's where this photo was taken, which is 2011, which is why I look quite a bit younger in that photo than I do in real life. So we took the whole family over there, 5 kids. They were a lot younger back then, obviously, but we again travelled around Turkey and visited family and that sort of thing. The Gallipoli trip wasn't really a big part of that tour, but we did stop for a one-day battlefield tour, and I dragged the whole family there. No one else was really probably that interested except me, but we went around the graveyards and did the battlefield tour, and some of my kids, my oldest daughter particularly, asked me questions about why. Why did the Australians come and fight here? In the context of knowing that the Turkish people are our friends, mum's from Turkey, our grandparents are Turkish. I think, well, war should be a fight between good versus evil. Why would Australians come around the other side of the world to fight here? And I didn't really have a very good answer for that question. The same question that I didn't really probably have a good answer for when I was in Lieutenant High School. So I sort of just swept that under the carpet and ignored it while we were on holidays. But when we came home, that was when I sort of started the process of wanting to research the history a bit more and understand the Turkish perspective and why did the Australians go and fight there.
So you've mentioned this is a fictionalized account of Gallipoli, but it's based quite heavily on a historical fact. So on your website, gallipolisoup.com, you state that mixing fact and fiction is like playing with petrol and matches. Why do you say that?
I guess a fact, particularly about something that's considered such a sacred subject in Australia, like the Gallipoli campaign, it's something that's a very well, almost like a revered subject. There are, as you mentioned, a lot of good books already that tell the facts and explain what happened. I think it's something that's very important to be respectful of, and to respect the memory of men who've died in the war and the impact that had on them and their families and on Australia as a nation. Really, it's quite a significant time in Australia's history.
Yeah.
So to take that and make a historical fiction story out of it and add to those facts things that I just make up. It feels like it could be, if it wasn't done well, it could be seen as disrespectful, I guess. And not many people seem to have done it. I went to looking for novels about Gallipoli, and there doesn't seem to be many around it. And I thought, well, maybe there's a good reason for that. Maybe other people thought better of it. Yeah, it seems like a topic that deserves respect and needs some care, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. What kind of research did you have to do for this book? Because there are lots of characters in this book, and like you said, you've got lots of different perspectives. Some are fictional characters, but some are real characters. So I imagine there was a lot of research around those different people. So to be true to the event, what kind of research did you have to do?
I did a lot of reading, which probably seems obvious, I guess, but a range of different types of books about the Gallipoli campaign. Some historical books. There's the official history war memorial books by Charles Bean, which are sort of the main reference. There's a lot of other books about the Gallipoli campaign more broadly, which I read, and some that are more targeted to specific events. So there's some books that, for example, just talk about the Lone Pine attack. There's another book about just the landing phase. So certainly a lot of those broad spectrum historical books, I guess, I read. I also read a number of biographies about some of the key characters. So, like you mentioned, some of the historical characters, which were probably the ones I felt most nervous writing about. Characters like Winston Churchill, John Monash, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. These are fairly famous people, and if you make stuff up about them, then it would be pretty easy to criticise, I guess. So I read some biographical accounts of those individuals and others. Also, memoirs and diaries. So the fictional characters are mainly infantry privates, both sides, Australian and Turkish soldiers. And to sort of do justice to those characters, I read a number of diary accounts, memoirs, things that they'd written about their experiences. They range from soldiers from all different battalions and brigades, and my original idea was to try to make them all real people, but I found that I really wanted to pick certain battalions and brigades and regiments who were involved in certain battles and sort of be true to those. But reading the soldiers' accounts who were involved, there was limited information, and I didn't really think I could do justice to any one person. But I was able to read, this soldier was in this trench and had this experience, and a different soldier was involved in a bayonet raid or bayonet trench raid in another battalion, but their experiences are all quite applicable, I guess, to those who were there. So that's probably another, I guess, key part of the research, to try to be true to the experiences of the soldiers on the ground, even though they are fictional characters.
Yeah. So you've mentioned some of the characters that are in here, and that includes Australians, Turks, English, Germans, in roles such as press correspondents, an ambassador, infantry privates, as you mentioned, and naval officers, a politician and a spy. How did you decide what characters to include in your book, considering there were so many who played a part in this event? And as we mentioned, you included fictional characters. You kind of already answered that, but if you wanted to elaborate, why did you do that?
Yeah, sure. So the story is told from multiple points of view. As you say, there are 17 different point of view characters in the story. Each chapter is from the point of view of one character,
Yeah.
and that's quite a lot. Most books will probably have less than that, I guess.
Yes.
But again, taking confidence from what I was reading in the Game of Thrones, that they're very complex and have many different points of view. So I thought, well, they were quite popular. I used to watch on the train when I'd go to work. So a lot of people seem to read that. So there must be at least a certain slice of society who's willing to deal with that level of complexity in their reading. So that sort of gave me confidence to put that in there.
Yeah.
And I've got a list of all the point of view characters at the front of the book, which
Yes, which is very handy because I went back to that a lot.
number of people have said
Yeah.
that they found that helpful. So I'm glad I put that in.
Yeah.
So how did I choose those particular characters? That was quite difficult, and it even kind of evolved during the course of writing the book, when I thought, oh, I need to include that event. Therefore, I need to have a character who can be on the ground and seeing that event through their eyes. So I tried to tell the story of what it was like for the people who are involved in Gallipoli, and why it happened. So there's I guess a few different sort of categories of characters. There's the soldiers who are on the ground, both Australians and Turkish, to really give a sense of of what it was like for those who were there, and the experiences that they went through. But in terms of why it happened, that sort of comes back to a fairly complex political sequence of events around World War One, and the German involvement, the English, and the Russians, and the whole politics of where the World War One was at that moment. So I guess I picked German and English pol- politicians, sort of characters, to give a perspective of the people who really were involved in those decisions. What their logic was, why did they think it was a good idea to initiate a whole new battlefront, and send all these men into a situation where so many of them were going to die? Like, what would be a good reason to do that? So I wanted to really get to the heart of some of those decisions, why they were made, what it was like for the people who made them, what were they thinking, how did they weigh up all of the pros and cons of that. A few of the sort of in-between characters, you mentioned there's a press correspondent and a spy, so they were, I guess, people they're real characters, not fictional, people who had access to information and were probably best able to see what was going on, and how the war was playing out, even in some ways better than the senior politicians, because they could really see what was going on. So I've got access to what they thought, and in some cases what they wrote down about their experiences and what they saw at the time. So that, to me, was kind of like a valuable perspective on why things played out the way that they did.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Turkish campaign during Gallipoli that you'd like Australians to understand? Because, as you mentioned before, it always seemed to be like a one-sided story.
Yep.
What is it that we need to understand about the other side?
There's a number of things there. I guess the Turkish army was very much led by the Germans at that time. The Germans were very clever in the way that they drew the Turks into World War One. The Turks and the Ottoman Empire, which has become modern-day Turkey, was in a sort of state of collapse, and really had just come off the back of a couple of years of war already, and they really weren't well positioned to enter into another war. And they also, the government in Turkey had just been through a military coup, so things were very unstable. But that they actively resisted joining World War One for some time. But the Germans were quite clever in the way they manoeuvred Turkey to come into the war. So they were there with German officers, providing a lot of the direction and really pulling the strings, so to speak. But nonetheless, the Turkish soldiers were very devoted. They were mostly very religious. They were Muslim. They believed very much that if they died defending God's country, that they would go straight to paradise. So they were very committed and very loyal. They saw the attack on the Gallipoli Peninsula as kind of their last stand defence to defend Istanbul or Constantinople, as it was called by the Europeans, against this attack. That was the home of their political capital, the home of the Sultan, who was also their religious leader. And they knew that if the British warships got through the Dardanelles behind the Gallipoli Peninsula, the next stop was Istanbul, and that was really the heart of their homeland under threat. So they were very committed to defending their homeland. A lot of those soldiers were farmers or people, conscripts, very poor. They certainly were not very well resourced. They had tattered uniforms. Some of them didn't even have proper boots, so they were not well funded.
Yeah.
And another thing that I think is really important to remember and to be aware of is that while roughly 8,000 Australians were killed at Gallipoli, the number of Turkish soldiers killed was probably about 10 times that, about 80,000.
That I was not aware of.
No, probably not a lot of Australians would realise that, because they have this view that there's this sort of perception of us going onto the beach and getting wiped out with the machine guns, with the Turks on the top of the hill, safe in their trenches. So that was not really the full story, and there were other Gallipoli battlefronts sort of at the southern end of the peninsula where the English and French attacked as well. So yeah, across all those fronts, a lot of Turkish soldiers suffered and died. Certainly a lot more than Australians. Yeah.
Wow. I'd call this one of your main characters, JJ.
Yeah.
So he and his brother Ronald, they're Australian brothers, and introduced them early in the story, and they answer the call to fight for empire. So even though they're fictional characters, they actually felt really real to me. How did you come up with these fictionalized characters, and did they resemble the soldiers you researched for this book?
Yeah, so like I said before, I did read a lot of memoirs and diaries and that sort of thing, and I really wanted to have some characters from Sydney who signed up and went over to Gallipoli. The battalions that they joined up were real. One key source that really helped with sort of fleshing out the experiences of those Australian guys was in 2015, so at the 100-year anniversary of the Gallipoli landing, the State Library of New South Wales, who has a whole lot of diaries, because a lot of people donate diaries to the library. They had a program where they typed a lot of these up for the 100-year anniversary, and some of the more complete, better ones were actually published and made available. One of those particularly I found very helpful. It was a diary of a fellow by the name of Archie Barwick. That book was published under the title of In Great Spirits, and he was in the 1st Battalion, which was the same battalion as these characters, and
Yep.
he went into a fair bit of detail about his experience in signing up and then going over there as well. So there was a few things like that, I guess, that I was able to draw on to try and understand what it was really like for the real young men who did sign up in that time, and sort of try and draw on some of those experiences.
Yeah. So for every character in your book, you've used a writing device in which you use italics to highlight their thoughts. And I'm just going to read a little bit from Tim's book. Let's just grab that. So this is, I'm going to be reading Ronald, and they're just about to head off to Egypt for some training. Could I be a killer? Will I be killed? I promised Em I'd come home after I'd done my bit. What if I didn't come home? Would she think I'm a hero or hate me? Or both? I wonder how she's coping without me. I must write. Like, that's just so very emotional. And you do this quite often. You use this writing device quite often in your book with all your characters. Why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so that's a writing device which I, as you say, I've used a fair bit. I picked that up from one of the books that I read about how to write when I realised that I had no idea what I was doing. And
it doesn't come across in the book like that at all.
Well, yeah. When I started, I guess this is a diversion, but when I first started, I got this idea, maybe I could write a book. I thought, okay, well, what do I do now? I sat down in front of a blank computer screen with Microsoft Word and started to write. And what I wrote was absolute garbage. It was all over the place. I didn't really know how to write dialogue or internal thoughts or descriptions of anything. So I fairly quickly gave up, and I thought I need to get some serious help and do a bit of research on how to write fiction that people would want to read, that makes it interesting. Having had read a fair bit, I thought maybe it wouldn't be that hard, but it's quite technical, I guess.
Yeah.
So this is certainly one aspect of that. Anyone who does a bit of research into how to write fiction, one of the key principles that they'll certainly come across very early on is the idea that you should show, not tell. And this is, I guess, one example of how to do that. Sometimes the idea to show, not tell it's easy to say, but it's hard to figure out how to really implement that in an effective way. Yeah. The idea of getting into the characters' heads is one way, I think, of doing that. So as an example, if we were, say, to describe this situation, and I'm coming here to sit down to talk to you, we could write a short paragraph that said something like, Tim walked in and sat down, and he looked up at the audience and felt a bit nervous about whether he'd be able to answer Marissa's questions well or not. That would be a fairly basic paragraph. It's not very interesting. It's not, doesn't really sort of draw you in to connect with the character, but it describes some of the mechanics of what happens and how it would feel. So another way to do that would be to maybe get more inside the character's head and see, well, how are they, what are they really experiencing? So it might be something more like, Tim came and sat down opposite Marissa and looked up at the audience, and his mouth felt suddenly dry. And then in italics, could say something like, wow, there's a lot of people here. I hope I can answer those questions well, otherwise I'll look like a real goose. And this is being live streamed as well.
Yeah.
End quote, sort of thing. So that approach is a way of,
and humanises it, doesn't it?
Yeah. So if we wrote it that way, then I don't need to say Tim felt nervous, because you know that, because you've been shown. You don't need to be told that. So that that particular device I got from a book. I didn't make it up. There's a book called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers by Rennie Brown and Dave King. It's one of the books that I'll mention on my website for anyone who wants to know about the writing process and wants any references or material. Because I certainly had to read a lot of books like that to get a bit of the technical side of writing to be able to do it effectively.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of one example of something that I picked up from a book, and I learned. I thought, oh, yeah, that's a way to really help to more effectively help the reader to identify with the character, to empathise with them, to connect with the character, and better really understand what their experiences are like.
And I guess also empathise with characters that you probably wouldn't normally empathise with.
Yeah.
You know, particularly in a book like this where we always felt it was one-sided, you know. You did empathise with the Turkish soldiers as well, you know. So I think you did. That was a really good writing device that you used. What were some of your favourite characters that you wrote in this book? And that can be historical or fictional.
Yeah, that's a really hard one to answer because I love them all. There's I guess a few different sort of categories of characters. The ones that I probably really felt I connected with the most were the soldiers, the ones who are fictional characters, both Australian soldiers and Turkish soldiers, and maybe it's because, in a sense, because I made them up, I felt like I created them.
Yeah.
But
Your
also,
babies.
yeah. but I could kind of empathise with their experience. I sort of imagined myself in their shoes. Or what if Australia went to war? What if I was that age and there was this call, you know, are you loyal? Are you committed to your country? Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your country? And these guys did what they believed was the right thing, and they were willing to basically risk everything they had to try and do the right thing. But I also really enjoyed writing about the some of the real characters, the politicians, and the people who made some of the decisions about the war, even though they sort of, in some ways, characters you can sort of love to hate and get a sense of their personal ambition and their willingness to sacrifice other people's lives for their own ends, but still to really get inside their head and understand what their motivation was, I found quite fascinating. And some of the other real characters, the submarine captain, Dacre Stoker, he's a very fascinating character, I found. Even though some of the people who gave me feedback said, oh, maybe it's a bit complex, maybe you could consider dropping him. But I felt his role was quite sort of pivotal in the story, and also just a fascinating character. So, yeah, I stuck with my original plan and kept him in there.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to the audience now and see if you guys have any questions. I've still got a few more, but if you are wanting to ask Tim a burning question, please put your hand up and I can come to you with the microphone. Okay.
What's the side character and one of the real characters for fiction?
He's a real character. His name is Charles Palmer, or Clarence Palmer, depending on which one he goes for. But yeah, he was the Turkish, the British consul official based at Çanakkale. So Çanakkale is the main Turkish town in the Gallipoli area. And he was an English diplomat located there, and he was very well positioned to see some of the things that were going on the ground, the way the Germans were, the German soldiers were making themselves quite at home in the area. And his role kind of evolved from diplomat to spy for a number of reasons that I guess I'll go into in the book. But what it essentially boiled down to was that he, with his sort of diplomatic immunity, he was able to access information and get information out. While the Ottoman Empire and Turkey had not declared war, so that they sort of maintained this stance that they were neutral, even though they were gradually sort of drawn into the war by the Germans and siding with the Germans. While they were officially neutral, then he was able to maintain his sort of diplomatic immunity and able to leak certain, not legally, but get certain facts back to the English. And at the point when the Turkish side was officially drawn into the war, then that situation sort of became a bit untenable. But he still had a bit of a role to play, and he still, without going into the details of what happened in the story, he still had sort of an active role in the early part of the story anyway, which I found quite fascinating. And I included him in the story because that's a perspective on part of the way that things evolved within the Turkish decision-making process, and he had a good sort of view of it, so I was able to give that sort of like a first-hand view of that part of the story.
Any other questions?
How did you choose the title?
Yeah, that's one I get asked a lot. There's a couple of ways I'll answer that. The short version is you have to read the book. There's a point in the story where you would read it and you say, "Oh, now I understand why it's called Gallipoli Soup." But in addition to that, I would say, I guess, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of books about Gallipoli already. Many of them are just called Gallipoli, and I wanted a title that would sort of differentiate my book from all the other ones out there. I think this book is a different style of writing, and I didn't want it to be just called Gallipoli or something generic. I wanted it to be something that's a bit different, a bit recognisable, and certainly, if you read the story, then it'll kind of make sense. I think I guess I took the lead from some other books, without wanting to mention Game of Thrones again. I guess that's a book where the title comes from one specific conversation that just takes place at one point in the book, and then it goes off. Like the story rolls on, but the theme of that conversation sort of reflects the theme of the book. Or something like To Kill a Mockingbird, where the title is nothing really related to the book, but it comes up once in the book, and you sort of think, oh, that reflects the themes of the book. So along those lines, I guess.
Any other questions?
From your initial inspiration to you must have had some preconceived ideas or thoughts from what you've experienced in order to embark on this insane project. What has changed for you with all that incredible research that you've done and the 7 years to write the book? How has it changed you? What are your thoughts now compared with going back before you started it? Your main conclusions, perhaps, of what has come out of it for you?
Good question.
Well, I guess in some ways, I wouldn't say it's changed me greatly as a person, I guess, but it certainly raised my awareness of that part of Australia's history, and given me an urge to tell the story, I guess. And part of the thing that made me keep going was thinking, well, when I went to the trouble of reading all these history books, I found them sort of quite fascinating, but also quite hard to read. And I felt a bit frustrated. That I thought, well, no one else is going to bother reading all of this material now that I've gone to all this effort. Not many people are even that interested in talking to me about it, let alone reading all of this material. So I guess I felt an urge to tell the story or to package it in a way that can reach people, people that I don't know. But I sort of have this desire that people read the story and learn something a bit more about Australia's history and how we interacted with the Turkish forces in the war, and hopefully that to sort of cement a friendship between the Australian and the Turkish community, and that certainly, if this is not too much of a sidetrack, when you go to Turkey, if you go to Gallipoli, it's quite amazing the respectful way that the Turkish people treat Anzac Cove and that whole Anzac area. And I just can't imagine that happening in Australia if a foreign force came and landed and attacked Australia. Whether it was the Japanese at Darwin or anywhere, I just can't imagine Australians showing that same level of respect for the people that came and died fighting for their own country. So it's quite amazing to see.
Any other questions? Sure. Yep, go for it.
Sorry, the sacrifice part of the title I think is probably a bit self-evident. The statecraft interests me. I suppose it's possible to argue that the Gallipoli campaign created both modern Turkey and modern Australia. The significant break with its past. Is that what you meant, or do you have some sort of more, I don't know, I'm just wondering, statecraft, what was the statecraft involved?
Yeah, I think that the subtitle is something that came about very late in the publishing process. My original intention was just to call the book Gallipoli Soup. And after I'd signed all the arrangements with the publisher, they said to me, "Oh, we really need a subtitle." I said, "What do you mean a subtitle? Novels don't have subtitles." I said, "Oh no, we need a subtitle. It's this sort of book." And I sort of, I guess, then had to think fairly hard, but also fairly quickly about what would be a suitable subtitle. And the thinking behind the statecraft and sacrifice, I guess, is to kind of reflect my sort of fundamental goals, which I've written on the back of the book, about wanting to explore what it was like for the people involved and why it happened. So the sacrifice is really what it was like for the people involved, because they sacrificed everything, a lot of them. And why it happened, I guess, is the statecraft part of the equation. So I wasn't really referring to the birth of the Australian nation or the Turkish nation. It was more the wheeling and dealing of the sort of political puppet masters, I guess, the British War Council, the German manoeuvring to draw Turkey into the war, and the British decisions about where to move troops and why they sent Australians to fight at Gallipoli. So I guess that was the statecraft part of it is really sort of some of those strategic aspects of the war, and statecraft is an interesting word. It sort of appeals to me. It's not a word that we would often use these days, but it sort of implies something positive, good leadership, and something that's a craft is sort of a positive thing. And there's a quote which I've included in there from a Rudyard Kipling poem, which is essentially talking about how the statecraft that the leaders of our nations really resulted in such a massive amount of death of the young people of these nations, and what a sort of paradox that is, that it's not really statecraft, it's a horrific, mistake.
Do we have any other questions? No? I will continue with mine. I've got a few more minutes to go.
Sure.
So for the history buffs out there, and I think there might be a few, who would like to see where you got your research from, your website has all the endnotes to your book, because you couldn't fit it in there because it's already too big.
Yep.
So can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Yeah, I like reading historical fiction, but I sometimes find it frustrating not being able to differentiate what's historical and what's fiction. And I was very keen to make the effort as I went through the writing process to keep notes. And for every chapter, there's 103 chapters. So for every chapter, there's a set of endnotes which I wrote up, so that any reader could look at those and say, oh well, how much of this is based on actual historical accounts, and how much is this stuff that the author just made up. And I probably made them too long, because when I went through the negotiations with the publisher, they said it's too big, and even to get them to publish the book as it stands was an effort. They said, "Oh, can you make it a bit shorter or whatever?" I said, "No, I can't really make it shorter. It is what it is." So the outcome of that negotiation was that the story is complete, but the end notes aren't in the book. So we agreed that I can make the end notes available freely to anyone who wants to look at them on the website. The website, as you mentioned, it's gallipolisoup.com, which means for any chapter you can read. You can say, you think, well, how much of this is based on history or what's made up, and you look at the endnotes for that chapter, and you get a bit of an explanation. It might say, in Charles Bean's official history, it says that this battalion fought on this hill on this day, and this many people were killed. So there's sort of some of the facts. Or it might be, this soldier wrote in his diary that he took part in this trench raid on this date, and this is some of the injuries that he witnessed, or this is how he felt. He's written his account of some of the experiences. So all of those sort of things are there. So yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity to mention that. I think I really try to point that out to anyone who's interested in reading the book to be aware, even though I know probably 9 out of 10 readers won't look at them, but at least they can know that they're there. And if anyone's interested in looking at it, then they can. And also, there's a number of the resources that I found quite helpful when I thought I need to get some help to how to write a novel, and went looking for books on the subject. There's a fair bit out there. Some of the ones I found really helpful. I've listed those on the website if anyone's interested in looking at that. If anyone's got a project in the back of their mind, a book they want to write, where to start, that sort of thing. There's some good material out there to help with that.
Excellent. I have one more question. So if you're thinking of a question, please put your hand up later. After writing this mammoth book, do you have another idea of a book in your head? And if so, can you tell us about it?
Look, I have a few ideas. I don't have anything very concrete yet.
Yep.
I really enjoyed the experience. I think I enjoyed it enough to say I'd like to do it again at some point. And I think now this book was launched Anzac Day. This is probably one of the last of the kind of events relating to this book, so I can kind of have some headspace to think about something different.
Yeah.
I love the idea of dramatised history. I obviously had a very close connection with this particular event, and I think I'd need to think long and hard about what's the right part of history that I'd really like to write about. But I think at some point I'd like to pick some sort of other part of history and weave that into a story. I'm not sure what that exactly would be just yet, but yeah, I hope to do that at some point.
Sounds like you might create a whole new genre for us to think about, this whole melding of fact and fiction, and
I'd love
the
to think so.
the blurred
Yeah.
line, you know, you don't know where it is.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it is a blurred line. I know
Yeah.
even Sutherland Library had trouble where to put
Cataloguing
it.
it. We
which-
didn't know whether to put it in fiction or
which shelf to
non-fiction,
put it
and I
on.
had to
Yeah.
email Tim and go, where should we put this? So that was an interesting dilemma.
look, I really do love the idea of dramatised history, and I
Yeah.
think it's
And clearly you must love the research side of it as well, because you're going back for more torture.
yeah.
Yeah. So, does anyone have a question? Yep, there's a few. Hold on, I'll come to you.
Following on exactly what you were just talking about there, have you read the Hilary Mantel trilogy of Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell? One Booker Prize, two Booker Prizes, Walpole.
No, I haven't. Sorry.
I
No,
mean, they have been described by some as the finest historical fiction that's been written so far. So, so
Yes,
read them for
that's
inspiration.
true.
yeah. Okay. No,
Yeah.
that's a good tip.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I love
Yep.
thinking about new parts
Just
of
gonna
history
head
that
over-
I'm not really across.
So, just going to head over to the other side.
Yeah, Tim, when you were in process of writing the book, correct me wrong, how many times did you go back to delivery in the process, and how did you shape your writing style as you were doing it when you were visiting places like Fratton and Lone these places? It was like you walking up through the.
I would have loved to, but I really didn't. I've been to Gallipoli 3 times. The first time, as I mentioned earlier, was when I was 24 years old and just married, and that was kind of a very new experience for me. The second time I went back was 2011 with this. That's actually a cropped version of the family photo in front of the wall at the Anzac Memorial at North Beach. So that was 2011. That was kind of just before I got the idea for the writing. I've been back only one other time, which was last year. So that was literally a week or two after I'd signed the contract with the publisher. So that was an opportunity to really go and explore and test out some of my theories about what was where. And look, there was some situations where I described a soldier at a trench on one particular hill looking across a valley to see another thing. And I thought, well, according to the topographical maps, I think that should be right, but to be able to then go later and actually stand there and look and say, oh yeah, that's good, I can see across there, that sort of works. So that was very satisfying. That was just last year, but it wasn't really practical for me to get over there during the time when I was writing. So that was all based on what I could read and what I could figure out from maps. I think so. Yeah. I didn't have any moments of thinking, oh, that was wrong. Yeah. Thanks.
Alrighty. Well, that brings us to the end of the night. So, can you all please give Tim a very big round of applause?
Thank you.
And please don't forget, he has brought books here for you to buy. It's $30.
Yes.
And Tim will be happy to sign. I would like to thank all of you for coming and for everyone at home for joining us to hear this very, very interesting talk. Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your book with us and, you know, sharing all the blood, sweat and tears you put into this book. It's a fantastic achievement. Well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you. It's my
And
pleasure.
thank you all so much for coming tonight. I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.